My siblings celebrated after I was cut out of the will. They hadn't read the last page. My brother uncorked a bottle of champagne less than 30 seconds after the attorney said I had been left nothing. The cork struck the ceiling of the conference room, and my sister laughed as if our father's death had finally delivered the punchline she had been waiting to hear. Neither of them noticed that Mr. Harlan still had one page beneath his hand. They were too busy celebrating the sentence on page 11. My daughter, Mara Bennett, shall receive no distribution under the foregoing provisions of this instrument. Owen raised his glass toward me with a smile he had worn since childhood, whenever he believed he had won. Celeste began calculating aloud what her share of the estate would buy. I sat at the far end of the polished table with my coat folded over my lap, listening to them divide houses, company stock, and cash, while our father's empty chair seemed to occupy the room more completely than any living person. Then Mr. Harlan asked them to sit down. Owen told him there was no need because the important part was finished. The attorney looked at me, then at the signatures my siblings had just placed on their acceptance forms. He turned the last page over and said the important part had not begun. I had expected cruelty that morning, though not champagne. For most of my life, our family treated affection like a performance review. Owen, the oldest, received praise for confidence even when confidence was all he brought. Celeste received forgiveness because she could make selfishness look fragile. I was the dependable one, which meant I was useful but rarely celebrated. When our mother died during my first year of college, I came home every weekend to cook, sort medication, and keep the household from collapsing. Owen was launching a consulting career in Chicago. Celeste was studying fashion in New York and posting photographs of grief between rooftop parties. My father, Thomas Bennett, did not ask me to sacrifice anything. That would have required acknowledging the sacrifice. He simply grew accustomed to finding me there. Over the next 15 years, I became the person who knew which invoices were real, which employees needed help, when his blood pressure rose, and why he sometimes stood alone in the old machine shop after everyone had gone home. My siblings called that proximity favoritism whenever it benefited me and unpaid domestic labor whenever it did not. Our father had built Bennett Precision from a rented garage into a manufacturer whose components were used in medical equipment and aircraft. The company was not glamorous, but it was valuable, and its value turned every family gathering into a quiet negotiation. Owen joined the board without ever working a full week on the factory floor. Celeste created a charitable foundation bearing our mother's name and charged its launch dinner to the company. I became an operations analyst elsewhere because father told me that having one child outside the family business might preserve at least one honest relationship. I believed him then. Years later, I understood he had also wanted someone who could see the company without depending on it. By the time his heart began failing, Bennett Precision employed 800 people across 3 plants. It also carried problems no one discussed in public: unexplained vendor payments, declining margins, and board minutes that seemed to approve decisions no one remembered making. Father asked me to review them 18 months before his death. That request changed everything, although my siblings assumed I was merely arranging doctor appointments. The reading took place 12 days after the funeral. Owen arrived with his wife and a private banker. Celeste brought her business manager, who introduced himself before offering condolences. I came alone. Mr. Harlan had requested that only beneficiaries enter the conference room, so the advisors waited outside behind glass walls, visible whenever Owen wanted an audience. The will began predictably. Father left personal jewelry to Celeste, his vintage car collection to Owen, and several charitable gifts to local schools and the hospital that had treated him. The family lake house went to Owen. Our mother's art collection went to Celeste. Each received $10 million outright and 20% of the non-voting shares in Bennett Precision. Their expressions grew brighter with every paragraph. I received Father's notebooks, his drafting tools, and the contents of a steel cabinet in the old machine shop. Celeste gave me a look of exaggerated pity. Then came the sentence stating that I would receive no distribution under the foregoing provisions. Owen did not wait for Mr. Harlan to continue. He stood, embraced Celeste, and declared that Father had finally corrected years of manipulation. It was a strange accusation because I had spent the previous year refusing Father's offers to reimburse me for travel and care. I paid for groceries when his appetite disappeared. I slept in a chair beside him after surgeries. I learned how to change the dressing around the line in his chest without making him feel helpless. Yet Owen told relatives I had isolated Father, while Celeste suggested I had exaggerated his illness to control access. They visited when photographs could be taken or signatures were needed. I was there for the unrecorded hours when father was frightened, angry, or ashamed of needing help. I had known that their version of the story would become louder after he died. What I had not known was whether he had done anything to answer it. During his final week, he squeezed my hand and told me not to confuse the first thing people heard with the truth. I thought he meant gossip. Sitting in the attorney's office, watching champagne spill across legal papers, I realized he had meant the will. Mr. Harlan slid the acceptance forms toward Owen and Celeste before reading the final page. He explained that the specific bequests required written acknowledgement because several assets involved transfer restrictions. Owen signed immediately. Celeste skimmed the first paragraph and signed beside him. Both forms stated that the signer had reviewed the will, accepted the benefits provided, and waived any claim inconsistent with its terms. Their advisors were outside, but impatience had always been the family trait they mistook for decisiveness. I did not sign because no form had been placed before me. When the ink was dry, Mr. Harlan collected the pages and returned them to his folder. Only then did he lift page 12. His voice remained calm. The final article began with a condition. All gifts described on the preceding pages were subordinate to the Thomas Bennett Stewardship Trust, created simultaneously with the will. Every controlling share of Bennett Precision, the industrial land beneath all 3 plants, the licensing portfolio, and the remaining $74 million in investment accounts had been transferred to that trust 2 years earlier. The will did not own those assets. My siblings had been celebrating over the decorations while the building belonged somewhere else. The final page named me sole successor trustee and controlling voting member of the trust. It granted me authority to protect the company, investigate transactions, remove directors for cause, and determine whether conditional distributions should be released. Owen's lake house and Celeste's art collection were outright gifts, but the cash and shares they had counted as theirs were subject to a certification. Each beneficiary had to disclose any money, property, compensation, or benefit received from Bennett Precision or an affiliated charity during the previous 7 years. Any intentional omission converted that beneficiary's $10 million gift into a repayment fund for the company. Contesting the trust, interfering with an audit, or accusing another beneficiary of misconduct without evidence would suspend all distributions. The page ended with a line father had initialed by hand. Mara receives no distribution under the foregoing provisions because what I entrust to her is not a distribution. It is stewardship, authority, and the obligation to decide what survives me. For the first time that morning, Owen stopped smiling. Celeste said the page had to be fake. Mr. Harlan produced the execution video, witness affidavits, medical evaluations, and trust certificate. Father had signed while fully competent, months before his final hospitalization. An independent corporate fiduciary would serve as temporary co-trustee for 90 days, preventing me from secretly altering anything. A retired federal judge had been appointed trust protector with power to review disputes. The design was not emotional or improvised. It was a structure built by a man who had spent decades planning for machine failures and had finally applied the same discipline to his children. Owen demanded his acceptance form back. Mr. Harlan refused. Celeste's business manager tapped on the glass, asking with gestures whether she needed him. She waved him away because admitting confusion in front of an employee would have embarrassed her more than the terms themselves. I said nothing. The truth was that I felt no triumph. My father had handed me control of an empire, and with it, the certainty that my siblings had given him reasons to build a trap. Mr. Harlan then unlocked a gray case and removed 3 sealed envelopes. Mine contained the trust documents, a keycard to Father's steel cabinet, and a letter instructing me to begin with vendor number 4471. Owen's envelope contained a financial disclosure form. Celeste's contained the same. They had 30 days to list every benefit received from the company and our mother's foundation. They were warned that the trust already possessed records, but voluntary accuracy would be considered when distributions were decided. Owen called the requirement insulting. Celeste called it grief-driven paranoia. Mr. Harlan reminded them they had accepted it in writing. My brother looked at me as if I had written every word. He said I had spent years turning Father against them and had finally been paid for it. I wanted to defend myself, but Father's last warning returned to me. Do not confuse the first thing people hear with the truth. I gathered my coat, the keycard, and the letter. Before I left, I told them I hoped their disclosures were accurate. Owen answered that innocent people had nothing to disclose. The speed of his reply frightened me more than anger would have. The old machine shop stood behind the original factory, a brick building everyone else considered obsolete. Father kept one office there after the executive team moved into a glass headquarters across town. The afternoon after the reading, I used the key card and found the steel cabinet bolted to the floor beneath his drafting table. Inside were 12 binders, 3 encrypted drives, and a handwritten index. The records did not resemble the rambling suspicions of a sick man. They were precise. Every binder covered a related entity: consulting firms, property companies, charitable accounts, executive expense reimbursements, and vendor contracts. Vendor 4471 was Northline Strategic Supply, incorporated 4 years earlier in Delaware. Bennett Precision had paid it $18.6 million for specialized materials. The listed warehouse was a mailbox. Its authorized representative was a former college roommate of Owen's. The materials invoices matched real purchase orders, but the prices had been inflated between 22 and 40%. Father had highlighted transfers from Northline into an investment company owned through a trust benefiting Owen's children. Celeste's trail ran through the Eleanor Bennett Foundation. The charity raised money for technical scholarships and breast cancer support, causes associated with our mother. Its glossy annual reports showed successful galas and generous grants. Father's records showed something else. The foundation leased office space from a company owned by Celeste at 3 times market rent. It paid her branding agency, funded travel described as donor cultivation, and purchased artwork from galleries that quietly paid referral commissions into her personal account. Some expenses could have been defended as extravagant but legal, others could not. A $2 million restricted donation intended for a community oncology center had been moved through 3 accounts and used as collateral for a loan on Celeste's Manhattan apartment. The hospital project stalled while she posted photographs from a foundation retreat in Capri. Father had written one sentence beside the loan agreement: "Ask her whether she remembers what her mother died from." I closed the binder and sat alone in the dusty office until the factory's night shift began. My own records occupied a thin folder. It contained every grocery receipt I had refused to submit, every flight I had purchased, and every hour I had spent consulting for the company without billing it. Father had added a calculation showing what Bennett Precision would have paid an outside restructuring advisor for the work. The amount was substantial, but no check was attached. Instead, there was a note: "You will be tempted to prove you deserved this by taking nothing. Do not. Fairness is not greed." Beneath it lay a copy of a resignation letter I had never seen. Father had prepared it for Owen, citing undisclosed conflicts and breach of fiduciary duty, but had not delivered it. Another note explained why. Removing Owen while Father was alive would allow him to claim an aging parent had been manipulated. The trust would require independent evidence, documented process, and a decision made after Father's voice could no longer dominate the room. He had not merely given me power, he had denied me the comfort of blaming him for how I used it. The following morning, I met the temporary co-trustee, Priya Shah, and the trust protector, Judge Marcus Bell. Priya had spent 20 years rescuing manufacturing companies from family disputes. Judge Bell had the patient expression of someone who had heard every sophisticated version of a simple lie. They confirmed that Father had commissioned a forensic accounting review, but stopped short of final conclusions. He wanted the beneficiaries' disclosures compared with the records. He also wanted the company protected before anyone knew the full scope of the audit. Owen remained board chair, and Celeste chaired the foundation. Both could destroy evidence or pressure employees. Priya recommended an immediate preservation order, restricted system access, and suspension of unusual payments. Judge Bell approved those measures under the trust. I signed the resolutions with a hand that felt detached from my body. An hour later, Owen discovered his authority to approve payments had been frozen. He called me 17 times. I listened to none of the messages until Priya was beside me. His first message accused me of theft. The second threatened an emergency lawsuit. By the 6th, he had shifted to concern about my mental state. By the 10th, he was offering to explain harmless accounting arrangements Father had never understood. The final message was almost gentle. He reminded me that businesses depended on confidence and warned that an investigation could destroy the company Father wanted me to protect. It was a clever argument because it used my duty as a weapon against enforcement. Priya heard it too. She said people who benefited from concealed risk often described disclosure as the dangerous act. We did not answer him directly. Instead, outside counsel sent notices to directors, banks, vendors, and data custodians. Backups were secured. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Employees were told only that the trust transition required a governance review. Within hours, someone attempted to delete Northline correspondence from Owen's executive account. The system captured the attempt and the remote address. It came from his lake house, the inheritance he had already considered proof that father loved him best. Celeste chose a different strategy. She arrived at my apartment carrying our mother's recipe box and crying before I opened the door. She said Owen had always controlled financial matters, and she had signed whatever advisors placed in front of her. She described the foundation expenses as misunderstandings caused by rapid growth. For 20 minutes, she spoke about sisterhood, grief, and the cruelty of legal processes. She did not mention the oncology donation. When I asked about it, her tears stopped so abruptly that the silence felt rehearsed. She said the money had never been spent, only temporarily pledged. I asked why a charitable donation was securing her apartment. She answered that wealthy donors expected foundation leaders to maintain a certain image. It was the logic she had used since adolescence. Anything she wanted became necessary once she described the audience. I told her to include every transaction in her disclosure and provide supporting records. She reached for my hand, but I moved the recipe box between us. Before leaving, she said Mother would be horrified by what I was doing. I replied that Mother might have been more interested in the cancer center that was never built. That exchange became the first sentence Celeste omitted when she told the family what happened. By evening, aunts and cousins were calling to say grief had changed me. Owen sent a message to senior employees claiming the trust transition was being exploited by an inexperienced beneficiary. Celeste posted a photograph of herself with father and wrote about protecting a parent's true legacy from those who confused proximity with love. She did not name me, which made the accusation safer and more effective. The comments filled with sympathy. I watched strangers describe me as a bitter caregiver demanding payment. For years, I had believed that if I behaved carefully enough, people would eventually recognize the difference between service and manipulation. The public reaction taught me otherwise. Narratives reward speed, simplicity, and confidence. Truth is slower because it arrives carrying documents. I stopped responding to relatives and concentrated on the audit. Every hour spent defending my character would have been an hour my siblings could use to move money. The emergency board meeting took place 4 days later. Owen entered with 2 litigators and a presentation describing me as a threat to stability. He argued that the trust's voting control did not permit operational interference and that father's final illness had impaired his judgment. Priya played the execution video. In it, father explained the trust structure clearly, answered questions about every asset, and joked that Owen would challenge competency before anyone finished reading the exhibits. Several directors looked down. The video continued. Father stated that he had observed conflicts involving officers, but wanted an independent process after his death. He asked the board to cooperate and warned that loyalty to an individual was not loyalty to the company. When the screen went dark, Owen called the recording theatrical. Judge Bell, attending remotely, asked whether Owen intended to challenge the trust he had accepted. Owen's attorney placed a hand on his arm. For once, my brother understood a warning before crossing it. He withdrew the objection but refused to resign. We did not remove him that day. The trust required cause supported by verified findings, and I refused to imitate the arbitrary power my siblings accused me of wielding. Instead, the board placed Owen on paid administrative leave and appointed an interim chair. Celeste was temporarily suspended from directing foundation funds. Devices were collected for imaging. Access logs were preserved. Independent auditors began interviewing employees. The process frustrated me because every fact required confirmation, every inference needed a source, and every action had to survive hostile review. Yet that slowness became protection. Owen could describe me as vindictive, but he could not explain why 3 independent firms, a co-trustee, and a retired judge reached the same conclusions. Father had understood that private certainty would never be enough in our family. He built a system in which the truth did not depend on anyone believing me. The 30-day disclosure deadline approached. Owen submitted 612 pages on the final afternoon. He listed salary, bonuses, travel, the use of company cars, and several loans. Northline appeared once, described as a vendor in which he had no direct ownership. He did not disclose the trust benefiting his children, the payments to his roommate, or the profit-sharing agreement recovered from an encrypted folder. Celeste's disclosure was shorter and more creative. She listed her foundation salary and apartment rent as ordinary related party transactions approved by the board. She claimed the oncology funds remained available, despite bank records showing they had been pledged and partially drawn. Both signed under penalty of perjury. Mr. Harlan accepted the documents without comment. Because they had certified completeness, the trust's verification phase began. Their signatures did not create the fraud, but they removed the possibility that missing information had been accidental. My siblings still believed the final page was primarily about inheritance. It was actually about leverage. Father knew they might return money if threatened with criminal exposure, but he wanted the company repaired, employees protected, and misconduct documented. The conditional gifts gave them a reason to cooperate without promising immunity. Priya sent each of them a discrepancy notice and offered 10 business days to amend. Owen responded with a demand that I personally disclose every conversation I had ever had with Father. Celeste submitted an amendment admitting to administrative irregularities worth $190,000. The known amount was already above $4 million. Their refusal narrowed our options. Outside counsel informed the relevant insurers, lenders, and charitable regulators. We did not contact prosecutors then, but the records created mandatory reporting duties in several jurisdictions. My role was no longer to decide whether family embarrassment should remain private. The law had entered the room because my siblings had invited it through years of signatures. Owen finally asked to meet without lawyers. I refused until Priya agreed to attend. We met in Father's old office, the one place my brother disliked because it smelled of oil instead of prestige. He looked tired but remained composed. He said Northline had been designed to protect margins by pooling confidential purchasing relationships. Any money reaching his children's trust was deferred compensation approved informally by Father. I asked for the approval. He said business founders often made decisions without paperwork. I placed a copy of Father's handwritten question beside him. Why is Owen billing us twice for titanium we never received? His face changed, not with guilt but with irritation that the dead had kept notes. He said Father had become suspicious near the end. Priya reminded him that the questioned invoices began 3 years before Father's diagnosis. Owen then offered to repay $5 million and surrender half his cash bequest if the audit ended. That was the first time he admitted, without admitting, that the issue was worth more than a misunderstanding. I asked him whether he knew what the inflated purchases had done to the factory. Managers had postponed replacing ventilation equipment because margins appeared too low. Health insurance contributions had increased while bonuses were frozen. A planned apprenticeship program was canceled. Owen answered that none of those decisions could be traced to one vendor. He spoke like a consultant measuring damage only where a spreadsheet placed a border. I remembered him at 17, persuading me to take responsibility for a dent in Father's car because he had a scholarship interview and I did not. He had promised to tell the truth later. Later never arrived. It simply grew more expensive. I told him the audit would continue. His composure broke. He called me an ungrateful spectator who had returned when Father was weak and claimed a company I had never built. Priya said the trust owned the company, not me. Owen laughed and replied that everyone knew legal language was how cowards disguised possession. He left without touching the repayment proposal. Celeste's private meeting took place 2 days later. She brought a valuation of the artwork Father had left her and proposed donating several pieces to cover the missing charitable funds. The collection was worth perhaps $6 million, but most pieces had restrictions and uncertain provenance. More importantly, replacing cash after exposure did not erase the use of restricted donations as personal collateral. Celeste insisted no patient had been harmed because the oncology center had not yet opened. I asked whether she understood that it had not opened because the pledged funds disappeared. She looked genuinely wounded by the connection. In her mind, consequences belonged to the people who experienced them, while intentions belonged to her. She said she had always planned to restore the money after refinancing her apartment. When I asked why her disclosure denied the pledge, she blamed her accountant. The accountant's emails showed he had warned her repeatedly. She then blamed Owen for creating a family culture in which everyone had to appear successful. It was the closest she came to honesty, but she still placed herself outside the word everyone. The audit adapted beyond what Father had known. Northline was only one vendor in a network of 6. Owen had directed contracts to shell companies, then used rebates to finance private investments. Some investments succeeded, allowing him to return portions and hide the pattern. Others failed, leaving a net loss of nearly $27 million. Celeste had used foundation funds to build a personal brand that generated sponsorship income paid to another company she owned. Together, their conduct threatened loan covenants and the foundation's tax-exempt status. There was also a joint transaction neither had disclosed. The family lake house had been renovated with $2 million charged to Bennett Precision as an executive retreat. Father owned the property then, but no board approval existed, and the company had never used it. Owen had just inherited an asset improved largely with corporate money. His champagne celebration had been over a house carrying evidence in its walls. The auditors found something worse in an archived message between my siblings. 6 months before Father's death, Owen wrote that, "Mara will make noise if she sees the vendor list." Celeste answered that I could be neutralized by making the family believe I was pressuring Father about the estate. They planned the story before the will was read. Celeste supplied photographs of me entering the attorney's office, taken when I delivered Father's medical directive. Owen told relatives I was arranging secret changes. That was why accusations spread so quickly after the funeral. The ground had been prepared. I had spent months wondering whether I had somehow appeared possessive without realizing it. The messages showed that my self-doubt had been an intended outcome. I printed them, then sat in my car until the shaking passed. Financial betrayal could be quantified. The campaign against my character reached backward and contaminated memories I had once trusted. I wanted to release the messages publicly. Priya advised against it. The trust's duty was not to win social media. Premature disclosure could prejudice investigations and expose employee information. She was right, but restraint felt like volunteering to lose a fight. Celeste continued posting about family unity. Owen spoke privately with suppliers, implying I planned to sell the company. 2 directors resigned, and a major customer requested reassurance. I began spending 12-hour days at headquarters, meeting teams who knew me mainly through rumor. I explained that the trust intended to preserve the business, invest in equipment, and separate governance from family privilege. I did not discuss the audit. Some employees remained skeptical. Others brought me records they had been afraid to report. A purchasing manager showed how Owen bypassed competitive bids. A foundation coordinator described being ordered to label Celeste's vacations as donor meetings. Truth did not arrive as one dramatic confession. It accumulated through people discovering they were no longer alone. Father's notebooks helped me understand why he had waited. 3 years earlier, an internal accountant had raised questions about Northline. Owen convinced Father the employee was unstable, and the accountant resigned after being isolated. Father accepted the explanation because he wanted to believe his son. When later invoices contradicted it, shame delayed him further. He began investigating quietly, uncertain whether exposing Owen would destroy the company. With Celeste, he resisted even longer because the foundation carried our mother's name. His notes were not those of an all-knowing patriarch laying a perfect trap. They were the record of a father recognizing that love had made him negligent. On one page he wrote, "I taught Mara that duty meant staying. I taught Owen and Celeste that love meant rescue from consequence. All 3 lessons were wrong." The final page of the will was his attempt to stop teaching them. At the end of the verification period, Priya issued preliminary findings. Owen's undisclosed benefits and losses exceeded $31 million. Celeste's exceeded $6 million, not including potential tax penalties. Under the trust, their $10 million distributions were suspended and converted into repayment reserves. Their non-voting shares were also withheld pending resolution. Owen kept the cars and lake house, though the company filed a reimbursement claim for improvements. Celeste kept the art, subject to creditor restrictions. They had not been left penniless, but the fortune they celebrated had vanished because they refused to tell the truth. Mr. Harlan delivered the notices on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, both siblings sued me, Priya, the trust, and Bennett Precision. They alleged undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty, defamation, and intentional interference with inheritance. The complaint described me as a resentful, unmarried daughter who exploited caregiving access to seize control. It did not mention page 12's audit conditions until an appendix nearly 200 pages later. Their lawyers sought an emergency order removing me as trustee. The hearing drew reporters because inherited manufacturing fortunes apparently became interesting when siblings attacked one another. Owen arrived looking solemn, supported by relatives who had never visited Father in the hospital. Celeste wore our mother's pearl earrings. Their attorneys argued that Father could not have intended to place authority in a daughter with limited executive experience. Our response included trust drafts dating back 4 years, competency evaluations, board correspondence, and evidence that I had repeatedly declined personal gifts. Judge Bell testified about his independent review. Priya explained the controls preventing unilateral action. Then Mr. Harlan produced the acceptance forms, signed before page 12 was read aloud. My siblings' counsel objected that they had not understood the terms. The judge asked whether 2 sophisticated beneficiaries represented by advisors had signed documents falsely stating they had reviewed the will. Silence answered more effectively than either could. The emergency motion was denied. The court found no evidence of incapacity or undue influence and substantial evidence supporting the audit. More damagingly, the judge ordered expedited discovery into the transactions my siblings had placed at issue by accusing us of fabrication. Their lawsuit opened doors the trust alone could not. Banks produced records. Former advisors received subpoenas. Owen's college roommate requested immunity before giving a deposition. Celeste's accountant turned over every warning she had ignored. The public complaint intended to humiliate me became a map for investigators. Within 6 weeks, the state attorney general intervened regarding the foundation. Federal authorities requested the vendor records. Our insurers appointed separate counsel for the company. I did not celebrate. 800 employees were now attached to headlines containing words like fraud and inheritance war. The final page had protected control, but no legal clause could prevent shame from spreading across innocent people. We stabilized operations by replacing conflicted vendors and renegotiating the company's credit line. I appointed an interim executive committee consisting mostly of long-serving managers whom Owen had overlooked. We accelerated maintenance, restored employee bonuses tied to real performance, and created an anonymous reporting system administered externally. I did not become chief executive. That surprised people who assumed control had been my goal. I remained trustee and led the search for an experienced CEO with no family connection. Father had given me voting authority because he trusted my judgment, not because our surname made me qualified for every role. The distinction mattered. Owen had treated access as expertise. I refused to repeat the error in a more flattering form. The lawsuit did not disappear after the failed emergency motion. Owen pursued it because withdrawal would expose weakness, while Celeste used it to delay regulatory action. Depositions lasted months. I spent days answering questions about every conversation with Father, every medication dose, every meeting with Mr. Harlan, and every personal resentment I had ever expressed. Their lawyers tried to convert normal frustration into a conspiracy. They asked whether I had told a friend that Owen was arrogant. I had. They asked whether I envied Celeste's ease with people. At times I had. A clean legal record does not require a clean emotional life, but opposing counsel counted on embarrassment making me evasive. I answered plainly. Yes, I had been angry. Yes, I had wanted Father to see how much I did. No, those feelings did not forge trust documents, inflate invoices, or move charitable funds. The more honestly I described my imperfections, the less useful they became as weapons. Owen's deposition was different. He treated every question as a contest and every document as an insult. When shown the Northline profit agreement, he claimed it was an unsigned draft. The examiner pointed to his electronic signature. He questioned the software. When shown bank transfers matching the agreement, he said they were unrelated. When shown messages discussing those exact transfers, he said context was missing. After 6 hours, his explanations contradicted one another so thoroughly that even his attorney requested a break. Celeste cried during hers and blamed grief, pressure, accountants, donors, and Owen. Then, an attorney displayed a message in which she wrote that the oncology funds were the cheapest capital available because dead women don't ask questions. She stared at the screen as though someone else had typed it. I had read the message before, yet hearing it entered into the record made me think of Mother during chemotherapy, apologizing to nurses whenever she needed water. That evening, I returned to the machine shop and opened Father's final notebook. I had avoided the last pages because they covered his decline. One entry described overhearing Celeste joke about restricted funds. He wrote that he wanted to confront her but became short of breath walking to the phone. Another described Owen bringing documents for signature while morphine made concentration difficult. Father refused and called Mr. Harlan the next morning. His last long entry addressed me without using my name. The child who stays is often punished with knowledge. She sees the weakness everyone else is allowed to ignore. I cannot repay that by giving her a throne built from the same weakness. I can only give her the tools to dismantle it. I finally understood that stewardship did not mean preserving Bennett Precision exactly as he left it. It meant removing the family habits that had made the company vulnerable, including his own. Settlement discussions began after the depositions. Owen offered to surrender his shares, repay $8 million, and resign in exchange for the company declining to cooperate further with prosecutors. We could not legally make that promise. Celeste offered the art collection and her foundation role if regulators agreed not to pursue personal liability. We did not control them either. Their proposals revealed how completely privilege had shaped their expectations. They believed every institution was a family table where the right bargain could keep consequences private. Priya explained that we could resolve civil claims, recover assets, and provide truthful information. We could not sell silence belonging to employees, donors, taxpayers, or the public. Owen walked out. Celeste remained and asked me for the first time what would happen to scholarship students if the foundation collapsed. I told her we planned to transfer legitimate programs to an independent charity. Relief crossed her face before she remembered she was supposed to resent me. The civil settlement was finalized 9 months after Father's death. Owen returned $12 million, transferred his interest in 2 investment entities, resigned from every company position, and surrendered the lake house to satisfy reimbursement and damages claims. Celeste transferred the art collection and her apartment equity into a restitution fund, repaid foundation compensation, and accepted a permanent ban from managing charitable assets. Both withdrew their challenges and acknowledged the trust's validity. The settlement did not determine criminal liability. It did preserve the factories, restore most losses, and fund the oncology center with the recovered charitable money. The hospital placed no Bennett name on the building. I requested that condition. Mother had been used as a brand long enough. My siblings issued statements saying they had settled to protect employees from prolonged family conflict. They did not admit fraud. Their remaining supporters repeated that wealthy families often used aggressive tax and vendor structures misunderstood by outsiders. But documents continued doing what documents do, existing without caring who sounded more confident. Owen's former roommate pleaded guilty to conspiracy and described the rebate scheme. Celeste's accountant entered a cooperation agreement. Charges followed. Owen faced wire fraud, tax offenses, and breach-related counts. Celeste faced fraud and misuse of charitable funds. Their attorneys emphasized repayment and lack of prior convictions. The cases moved slowly, stripped of the dramatic pace people expect from stories. During that year, I learned that accountability is mostly calendars, document requests, canceled weekends, and the exhausting refusal to let complexity become an excuse for forgetting. I saw Owen in person only once before sentencing. We were in the courthouse corridor, separated from lawyers for a few minutes. Without the company, tailored office, or family audience, he seemed smaller, but not transformed. He asked whether I was satisfied. I told him satisfaction had never been the point. He said that was easy for the person who ended up with everything. I reminded him that the trust was not my personal property. He asked whether I truly believed that distinction mattered when I controlled it. I said it mattered every day because control without ownership required me to justify decisions to people beyond myself. He looked toward the courtroom and said, Father had designed a humiliation, not a succession plan. I answered that Father had offered him $10 million in exchange for one honest disclosure. Owen had chosen the lie. His face tightened. For once, he did not blame me. He simply turned away. Celeste wrote me a letter before her hearing. Unlike her public statements, it contained no references to mother or family unity. She admitted she had known the oncology pledge was wrong. She said the foundation had begun with sincere intentions, but attention became a currency she could not stop spending. Each event needed to be larger, each photograph more convincing, each sign of wealth proof that she deserved donors' admiration. When the money tightened, she borrowed from restricted funds, expecting the next gala to replace them. Shame made her hide the first transfer, and hiding made the next one easier. She apologized for using the family against me because she knew I feared being seen as selfish. The letter did not ask forgiveness. I believed parts of it because, for the first time, she described choices rather than accidents. I gave it to my attorney and kept a copy. Believing an apology did not require restoring access. Owen received a prison sentence of several years, along with restitution and supervised release. Celeste received a shorter custodial sentence, followed by home confinement and a lengthy ban on fiduciary roles. Some relatives called the outcomes excessive, others called them merciful. I stopped measuring justice by whether everyone felt the same amount of pain. The company recovered, donors were repaid, and the hospital project resumed. Employees who had been pressured to remain silent received settlements and formal apologies. The accountant pushed out years earlier was invited back, not as a symbolic gesture, but as head of internal audit. He accepted only after negotiating authority to report directly to the independent board. I admired that condition. The new CEO, Dana Liu, had spent her career rebuilding advanced manufacturing firms. She understood machines, margins, and the human cost of executives treating workers as spreadsheet cells. Under her leadership, Bennett Precision sold the private aviation division Owen had loved boasting about and invested in medical components, apprenticeships, and safer plants. Revenue dipped during the transition, then grew on healthier contracts. The trust amended governance rules so no family member could hold an executive position without external qualifications, independent review, and 5 years of relevant experience. Voting control would eventually pass to an employee benefit and community foundation structure, not to my future children or my siblings' heirs. Blood would no longer be a credential. I did receive compensation as trustee, exactly as Father's note instructed. Accepting it was harder than signing billion-dollar resolutions. Some part of me still believed goodness required invisibility, and that taking payment would validate every accusation. Priya asked whether I would advise any other woman to manage a complex trust without compensation. I said no. She asked why fairness applied to everyone except me. I had no intelligent answer. The board approved a market-based fee with independent review. I used part of it to buy a small house near the river, not a mansion or penthouse, just a place with wide windows and a workshop where Father's drafting table fit. For the first time, the room containing his tools belonged neither to the company nor to the past. The steel cabinet remained in the old machine shop. After the investigations concluded, we archived the records and converted the building into a training center. Apprentices learned precision machining beside displays about the company's history, including a section on the governance crisis. Some advisors recommended removing family details to protect the brand. I refused to turn accountability into another secret. The display did not sensationalize Owen or Celeste, but it explained how conflicts of interest, weak controls, and loyalty to individuals nearly destroyed a healthy company. It also acknowledged Father's delay. Organizations learn only when history includes the decisions respected leaders got wrong. 1 year after the will reading, Mr. Harlan invited me to his office to close the estate portion of Father's plan. The same conference room looked smaller without my siblings' expectations filling it. The champagne stain had long since been cleaned, but I could still see the cork striking the ceiling whenever I looked up. He handed me the original final page, now released from evidentiary hold, and a sealed note Father had instructed him to deliver after all challenges ended. The note contained no new fortune. It said, "If they read this far, perhaps they have learned patience. If only you are reading, remember that being trusted does not mean being trapped. Finish the work, then build a life that does not require anyone's permission." I cried harder over those 2 sentences than I had at the funeral. For most of my life, I had imagined freedom as finally being recognized by my family. I believed there would be a perfect explanation after which Owen admitted I was not jealous, Celeste admitted I was not cold, and Father admitted how much he relied on me. The final page gave me something less comforting and more useful. Proof that recognition could not repair people committed to misunderstanding me. Owen read documents only for what he expected to receive. Celeste read relationships only for what they reflected about her. I had read every room for signs that I was allowed to belong. None of us had been patient enough to reach the truth without being forced. My relationship with Celeste became limited, but not non-existent after her release. She sent quarterly restitution confirmations through counsel and volunteered in administrative roles where she handled no money. 2 years later, she asked whether we could meet. We sat in a quiet cafe. She looked older, without the polished brightness she once maintained at any cost. She apologized again, this time naming the rumor campaign, the photographs outside the attorney's office, and the sentence about our mother. I told her I accepted that she regretted those things. I also told her trust would not return because regret had arrived. She nodded. We speak occasionally now, with boundaries so plain they once would have offended us both. Reconciliation, I learned, is not restoration. Sometimes it is the construction of a smaller, safer relationship where a dangerous one used to stand. Owen has never apologized. His letters focus on Father's failures, the severity of prosecutors, and the opportunities the company lost while he was gone. I answered the first, correcting factual errors. I did not answer the others. His children are beneficiaries of education trusts father created separately, protected from their father's creditors and from my discretion. I meet with them once a year alongside an independent advisor. I never discuss the case unless they ask, and I do not make them defend him or condemn him. Inheritance should not force children to choose a version of their parent. That is one family tradition I can end without a vote. The oncology center opened 3 years after the funeral. It serves patients regardless of ability to pay and includes a transportation fund for rural families. At the opening, the hospital director thanked donors, staff, and investigators who recovered the restricted gift. No one from our family cut a ribbon. I stood near the back beside Aunt Ruth and watched a nurse lead the first patients through bright doors. For a moment, I imagined Mother there. I did not imagine what she would say about Celeste or me. The dead are too easily recruited into arguments they cannot correct. I simply remembered her hands, thin from treatment, folding thank you notes for nurses. The center was not redemption for our family. It was a building patients could use. That was enough. People who hear the story often focus on the fortune. They ask how much the trust was worth, whether I could sell the company, whether I ever wished the assets belonged to me outright. The numbers were large, but the real inheritance was a set of choices no amount of money made simple. I could preserve an image or expose damage. I could use control to crown myself or build controls that limited me. I could treat my siblings' suffering as entertainment or keep attention on repair. Every option revealed something about the person I would become after Father's decisions no longer excused mine. I keep a copy of page 12 framed in my workshop, but not the side most visitors expect. The legal text faces the wall. Facing outward is the blank back page, marked only by pressure from Father's signature. It reminds me that documents end, authority expires, and whatever comes next must be written by the living. On difficult days, I still hear the champagne cork and my siblings' laughter. I remember how certain they were that my exclusion proved their worth. Then I remember Mr. Harlan's hand resting on the unread page. Owen and Celeste believed they had won because they stopped reading at the sentence that hurt me. They celebrated a version of the story in which love was measured by objects, and my years beside Father ended in public rejection. In doing so, they signed away every excuse they might have used, accepted every condition they had not bothered to understand, and exposed the choices they believed wealth would hide. The last page did not make me richer than they were. It made their shortcuts visible, and gave me the authority to protect people who had never been invited into our family argument. My father could have written a simpler will. He could have divided everything evenly, disinherited them completely, or handed the company to me without conditions. Instead, he left a final test built from the weakness he knew best, our habit of deciding what something meant before reaching the end. Owen saw assets. Celeste saw status. I saw rejection. For 30 seconds, all 3 of us were wrong. The difference was that I stayed seated long enough to hear the final page.